97% of all golfers fail at least one of the main 4 rotary centers that exist for golf. And the crazy thing is that every single one of them tend to fall for one of these 3 common traps. I'm Chris Finn. I'm the founder of P4S Golf. I'm a physical therapist, Golf Digest top 50 fitness instructor, and I have a whole lot of other certifications that you probably just don't care about, but we have helped over 15,000 golfers hit the ball farther, get out of pain, and play this game as long as possible. Today, I'm going to walk you through the 3 common mobility mistakes that golfers make, talk to you about which ones are the most harmful, and most importantly, what to do instead. So let's get into it. So before we go on, if you want to see if you're one of the 3% of golfers that can pass all 4 of the rotary centers, go to our website, take our free home mobility assessment. It's fast, it's easy, it takes less than 5 minutes. And let's start by knowing where you are, and then you can figure out what to do about it. So the first big mistake that golfers make is that, unfortunately, they statically stretch, meaning if you remember back in elementary school, and the teacher would have you bend down, touch your toes, hold it for 10 seconds. That's what a lot of golfers do, and they think that that's actually going to help their golf game. In fact, it does literally nothing to help your golf game. Instead, what we should be doing is looking at soft tissue work, using softballs, lacrosse balls. If you're going to see somebody, you could get deep tissue work, dry needling. There's so many different modalities or ways that you can do it. At home, you can use a Theracane. I mean, you can literally find any $5 product or ball out there to dig into tissue and go after the trigger points. The reason why this is important to understand is with static stretching, the idea behind it is that a muscle, let's say, is 3 inches when it's supposed to be 6 inches. And so if you bend down and touch your toes, then your hamstrings, if you hold it long enough, it'll go from 3 inches to 6 inches. When in fact, what we know from research is that the little actin myosin fibers in the muscles take at least 5 minutes of a static stretch hold for there to start to be any actual movement at that level of the actual tissue. Prior to that, when you start out, now some of you listening, you're gonna say, hey, wait, Chris, but when I start, I can only touch my ankles, and after I hold it for 30 seconds, well, then I can touch my shoes. Well, that's just because basically what your brain does is it creates a governor. Think of in the car, there's a red line, right? When you ramp it up, now you can put it into the red line, but that's kind of where the car starts warning you that, hey, that might be a little too much for the engine. Your brain does the same thing for your body. So when you go down initially and you hit your ankles, your brain goes red line, it actually stops you from going any farther. Now, as you hold that for 30 seconds, then all of a sudden your brain says, oh, we're okay. And it will allow you to kind of go a little bit deeper. Now, you didn't actually increase the length of the tissue, you just got into your red zone. And that's the difference. What we're trying to do is actually get usable range of motion. And first of all, hamstring length really doesn't help you at all in golf. But when you're looking at trying to increase mobility that does matter, like the rotary centers, like if you took the home assessment on our website, you can see it's free and it'll actually tell you, hey, your hip internal rotation is tight, so you can't rotate into your follow through or into your takeaway. Your shoulder rotation is tight, so you're gonna have a steeper golf swing. Or your trunk rotation is not where it needs to be, so you're gonna stand up out of posture, right? In order to increase those ranges of motions, the reason that those will be limited is not because the muscles are short, but because the brain is basically created neurologically, there's been these what are called trigger points. Best analogy I have is if you think of spaghetti on a plate, and if you put all the spaghetti parallel on a plate, that's what healthy tissue fibers look like. If you then take your fork and you twirl that fork, so all the spaghetti ends up all around the fork, that's what a trigger point looks like, right? So if you had a piece of spaghetti that was 3 inches long, you twirl it, now each end is only maybe an inch away from each other, right? It's not because the spaghetti got shorter, it's just because it got twirled up. And so what you can do is you can use lacrosse balls, baseballs, softballs. You could use hands if you're going to go to a masseuse or a physical therapist, or needles if you're dry needling. There's lots of different ways that you can use different tools to do it yourself or have somebody do it for you. And basically you can release that trigger point. And when that happens, all of a sudden the spaghetti falls off the fork and now the ends become 3 inches apart again instead of 1. And that's where we see immediate improvement in range of motion, immediate improvement of flexibility in the hips and in the shoulders that you can use right then and there in your golf swing. So that's why it's really, really important to understand if you're doing static stretching, nothing's happening unless you're actually holding it for 5 minutes, which I've yet to meet somebody out of the 15,000 golfers we've worked with that can actually hold a stretch for 5 minutes. And then B, if you're doing, the goal is to increase your mobility so you can use it on the golf course, doing tissue work is the quickest way to not only see that result, but there's also been studies that have shown doing an activation warm-up and doing tissue work relative as compared to doing static stretching, you actually gain speed immediately on the driving range by warming up that way versus static stretching, which interestingly, actually you'll see a decreased max club head speed versus if you just did it cold. So really interesting stuff if you dive into it. And make sure you stick around at the end of the video because we're actually going to go into showing you different things that you can do to actually improve your mobility from a tissue standpoint. So let's dive into the second mistake that most golfers are making, and that's just generally like, throwing, Jello at the wall, just doing mobility anywhere and everywhere that they just think feels tight and not having a plan, not assessing what they actually need, and just kind of, just shooting everywhere they can and hoping something feels better and moves better. So the number one thing that here to start is you need to assess and stop guessing, right? And, I'll even say this, if you don't assess anything, there's really only 4 areas that matter for golf when it comes to mobility: your hips, your shoulders, your thoracic spine, and your neck. If you can't rotate in any of those areas, your golf swing is going to be limited. You won't be able to make a full turn. You'll lose posture. You're going to substitute standing up out of posture or moving excessively side to side or forward and backwards. Maybe you struggle with early extension where your hips come into your hand space through impact. All of that can be due to limitations in your rotary mobility in those 4 areas. So even if you don't assess anything, just do those 4 areas. And you're better than 90% of golfers. Now, if you want to know even in more detail which one to go after, then the free home assessment that we have on our website is phenomenal. But basically, it takes less than 5 minutes to do on your own, and you can identify, hey, my hips are terrible, and I passed the other 3. Great, spend more time on your hips, right? It's not rocket science here. Unfortunately, I think what people tend to do is they do those stretches that they learned in elementary school, and they put the arm back over the head, they bend over and touch their toes. Think of gym class, and they just kind of continue to do those and think that that's all that they can do. And when all of a sudden their swing starts getting shorter, their distance starts becoming less and less and less, they throw their hands up in the air and they go, oh, well, I'm just getting old. When in fact, what we have seen is that golfers in their 50s, 60s, 70s, we have golfers in their 90s, that when they address these 4 main rotary centers the right way, if you remember from mistake 1, instead of stretching, doing actual tissue, soft tissue work, right? When you take the solution from 1, which we're going to actually show you how to do a little bit later here in this video, when you take that and then you apply it to the 4 rotary center joints, it's amazing what we start to see. We see distance loss as people age decrease by 80%. In fact, the average gain that we see from golfers when they start doing the right stuff in the first 10 weeks, average is 10 yards. Average in the first year is 20, right? So it's amazing what can happen for you as a golfer if you know the right things to do, you know where to do them, and most importantly, you know how, which we're going to show you here after we talk about the third mistake that golfers make. Jumping into the third mistake that golfers make here, this is one that even golfers who do, maybe they do the right stuff, they are doing tissue work, maybe they're doing the actual mobility in the 4 areas, right? So they're not committing mistake 1 or mistake 2. If that's the case, what I see a lot of golfers do here is they don't realize that you have to get stronger to actually maintain that mobility, right? So they just kind of get this like vicious cycle. Think of a dog chasing their tail, and because they feel tight because they're not strong enough to support their mobility. So they go on, they do the tissue work in the core joints that they need to, their hips, their shoulders, their spine, wherever their limitation is, but then they don't go do the strength work. So then it gets tight again because your brain's job is to take the path of least resistance. And guess what takes less work to control? Less mobility. So it makes sense that if you don't have the strength, your body's going to try to lock down the joints to limit the amount of motion you have. So then it has to do less strength work. Okay. So this is a cardinal sin that I see so many people do. They put in the work, they get more mobile, they feel better, their pains are gone. And then, they get to the golf season and they're like, hey, I'm just going to keep doing mobility. I don't have time for strength training. And unfortunately, what happens is those people still a lot of the times end up getting hurt because they lose their strength to support that mobility. And the crazy thing is that once you get stronger, you actually have to do less mobility work. You do less tissue work because your body can maintain and sustain a level of effort and a level of of play. In terms of playing 2, 3, 4, 5, right? The stronger you are, and if you're doing the right stuff, you can play more times a week and actually have to do less than somebody whose body is not primed, not prime time, and they maybe only play once because it takes them 3 days to get better because they aren't strong, they aren't doing their tissue work. So those are the big 3 mistakes. And what I want to do now is let's get into talking about some alternatives to make sure that you are doing the right stuff so that you can play this game for as long as possible, and that you're one of those golfers who picks up 10 yards in the next 3 months, 20 yards in the next year. For the first mistake, so obviously we want to avoid statically stretching like you did in gym class, and instead we want to get into doing dynamic warm-ups. So the key for a dynamic warm-up is ideally you want to pick movements or exercises that are what's called multi-joint. So instead of, think of like a bicep curl is a single joint exercise, right? Only your elbow is moving, versus a squat. So if you're doing like an air squat, your ankles are moving, your knees are bending, your hips are moving. Like there's multiple joints that are engaged. That means there's more muscles engaged. And the way that you warm up your body literally is by creating friction between the muscles and the joints and internally. So the more muscles and joints that we get moving, the more internal temperature increase we will see. So some great things that you can do on the range would be air squats. You could do lunges. Some people even throw in a lunge and add like a trunk rotation, sometimes even holding a golf club. They'll do a lunge and then rotate. Very easy to do, like just even in your hitting bay. You just kind of lunge, rotate, stand back up, lunge back again. That's very easy. There's also, you can do leg swings. These are also great to also kind of wake up your balance a little bit on the leg that's planted. There's just lots of different exercises, really no wrong exercise to do here. That's the key for a dynamic warm-up side of things. Hopefully this gives you an idea of the different types of things that you can do. So in talking about this, let's jump and talk a little bit about shoulder work. So one of the greatest exercises that I love for the shoulders would be like basically a 90-90 external rotation of the shoulder on a door frame. You can do it in the locker room before you come out. You can push it a little farther and do it into golf posture. That actually makes it a little more challenging, right? So it's kind of an activation where you're trying to get the muscles in the back of the shoulder to engage so you can get that rotation. You can also do, there's obviously lots of other shoulder and arm movements you can do kind of with the golf club, just dynamically moving them back and forth, rotating them. It's a great way to also incorporate the thoracic spine as well to kind of get a 2-for-1 deal, right? Where you can do rotations with the thoracic spine and the arms and the shoulders are moving. So, and you can do this in standing. You can lay down on the ground and you can actually do what are called like open book stretches, right? So if you see how, laying down on the side, you're kind of opening up the thoracic spine, you can actually then rotate the arm out as well. So lots of different levels of warm-ups that you can do here. And from a mobility drill standpoint, targeting specifically the joints that you need to do. Hip mobility would be exercises like squats. Now, if you're brand new, you could do sit to stands off of a chair. You could do goblet squats. You could also then progress, if you're more advanced, to hex bar squats, or you could even do barbell squats, right? So there's lots of different progressions there. Other variations would be things like lunges, step ups would, just to give you some ideas of exercises that will help to get that lower body stronger. That's all, generally speaking, knee dominant exercises. There's the brother and the sister of lower body strength, and the second is the hinging exercises. So those would be things like a deadlift. You can go at the highest level with a barbell. You can increase safety and go to more of a hex bar, less likely that you do it incorrectly, lower injury risk there. And then you could even go down to kettlebells, whether it's swings or just kettlebell deadlifts. And obviously there's lots of variations that you can do through there, even into band pulls. Those would be the kind of 2 big groupings of lower body exercises, always working in 360 degrees. So, squats, deadlifts, you can do lateral lunges, all those sorts of exercises are great to help get that lower body stronger, to maintain that mobility that you're working really hard to keep. Now for the upper body, some of the best exercises are generally going to be push or pull exercises. So think of like a lat pull down or a seated row would be examples of pull exercises. Bench press or like a chest pass with a medicine ball would be examples of push strength in the upper body. And then, so those are kind of your big movements. With the shoulders, you can then also get into smaller external rotation exercises if you have specific rotator cuff challenges that you're working through. One of my favorite exercises for the thoracic spine, a lot of the times we'll use our K pulley here in-house. Great if you don't have one of these flywheels, which are phenomenal for adding club head speed. You can just do it at your gym with a band or with a cable machine, working on trunk rotations to continue to get that trunk as strong as possible to maintain that thoracic mobility. So if you watch this and you found it valuable and you're just not sure where you stand, like head over to our website and take the home assessment. It's free, less than 5 minutes. That question will be answered and you'll be ready to rock and roll.